I'm going to introduce Nick Riccardi now. He's an adjunct professor and research and program assistant of sport analytics at Syracuse University's Falk College. One of our sponsors today. Nick is going to talk to us about presenting baseball data in Tableau. Nick, take it away.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be back this year. If any of you were around last year, maybe you saw the presentation then. But again, what we're going to go ahead and try to do today is show you how Tableau can be a very effective and easy way for us to go ahead and make visualizations and do some other things as well. So the beauty of Tableau is if you're maybe still in high school, just in college, and maybe you don't have very, hardcore technical skills in terms of programming and stuff like that, then this is a great tool for you to kind of get into the analytics of things without having to do a whole lot of work, to be honest. It almost feels like cheating sometimes at how easy things can be and, the way that you can make very powerful visualizations. So if you were around last year or not, you can check out that video last year. I think it's on YouTube. But there also, in that presentation, there's not too much different going on today. I wanted to do things, relatively basic again in terms of the type of visualizations, but I wanted to build on what we did last year by showing you how you can use some of the analytical tools and make kind of better presentations overall by being able to use the dashboard. So if you're able to follow along with Tableau yourself, if you have the data file, then you can go ahead and follow what I do. Otherwise, just go ahead and sit back and relax and be able to, just take in what I'm talking about and perhaps be able to think about how you want to use this, going forward yourself. So I'm just on the basic Tableau startup screen here. You can see I have all these other Tableau worksheets that I've used in the past, and I can just go ahead and go to a file here with Microsoft Excel to be able to bring in the data set that I want to use. So the data set I'm using is from Fangraphs. It's just from last year, and basically it is the qualified hitters, which I believe is based on plate appearances. So what we can see here, there's 129 qualified hitters from last year, and we can see basically a bunch of basic stats in terms of who these players are, the team they play for, plate appearances, and then I'm more on the advanced side of things. So looking at barrel percentage, hard hit percentage, we have more basic stuff like batting average, but also looking at slugging, and obviously we're just talking about WOBA and stuff like that. So this will be your data screen. We can go over to sheet one and basically go ahead and start to begin, plotting things out. First thing I want to do is take about 30 seconds or so and just explain to you what you're seeing. So on the left-hand side, this is where all your data lies. So all these green, almost hashtag looking symbols, this will go ahead and tell you these are numerical variables. And then when you see this blue ABC, this is just a categorical variable, or generally what we would store as text, anything that's basically not a number. In the big white space here, this is your plot space. So this is where we're going ahead and be able to see our visualizations. And then what we can see up here with columns and rows, our columns refers to our x-axis down here, the horizontal axis, and the rows is our y-axis. Marks is really where we're going to be able to have fun with things, be able to control the size of data points, add color, add detail and labels, all those type of things. With this drop down, you can change the type, the way the data point goes ahead and gets to look. And again, the beauty of Tableau is the simplicity in it, right? So really all that we need to do is click and drag things to places. If we have an idea in mind of the type of visualization that we want to create, we can do so quite simply. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to show you a scatter plot. We basically did a very similar visualization last year, but the reason I'm doing is because we can build an analytical model or algorithm on top of it. So I'm going to do something really simple. I'm going to take average, which is, again, batting average here, and drop this into the columns. And the first thing you'll notice is that basically what it does, when you just drop a column into rows or columns here, basically what happens is it just sums all the values in that entire column. So if we summed all the batting averages, across the 129 players, we get a value of 33.3. Not really informative, nothing that we're going to get out of that yet. Now I want to contrast batting average with hard hit percentage. So there might be a little bit of a trade-off in terms of batters, in terms of trying to put a ball in play and get on base, or trying to hit the ball hard and go for, bigger hits or home runs and things of that nature. So I want to contrast the two type of things and see what kind of hitters we kind of get out of this. So I can grab hard hit percentage and drop that into rows. And now again, it's just summing all of hard hit percentage. So we just get this one data point, which is just a weird sum of all the values across the two columns. In order to see individual data points, so for each individual player, I can drag name here and drop that to the bottom of marks. And now we see a scatter plot that looks a little bit better. One thing that we will notice is that basically on the lower hand side, the minimum, there are kind of natural levels here, right? So we have all this extra plot space that really contorts basically the plot space there and doesn't really give us the best visualization. So I can edit this quite easily. So for example, hard hit percentage, we can see here that the minimum is a little under 0.2. So if I want to get rid of this white space down here, I can double click on hard hit percentage, or you can right click on it and edit the axis. We can go to custom because it does automatic for now and it just sets that to 0. And let me go ahead and put this to 0.15. It automatically will go ahead. It's doing it behind. Now you can see that basically it changed here, right? So that looks a little bit better on the y-axis. I'll do the same thing for average. Again, we don't really have any players besides one player here under about 0.2. So I'll just change this to 0.15 as the minimum as well. Now we can see our data points are much better distributed across the plot space, and we can see kind of a better relationship of what's going on. Now, there's a lot of things that we could do to a scatter plot. We could add things to the size and color and whatnot, but what I want to do is show you how I can put an analytical model on top of this. So what I'm going to use is called a cluster analysis. Clustering, basically, from a simple standpoint, without getting into the weeds of the math and everything like that, is basically taking whatever variables you pass it for data points and putting data points into groups, or what we call clusters, as a means of categorization. So this will allow us to basically understand parts of our data that we might not know from the standpoint of doing some exploratory analysis. So what I can do here is up here in the top left where we have our data tab, right next to that is analytics. And the beauty of, again, Tableau is this simple thing where I could go into R or Python and do cluster analysis that way. But really what I can do is just from a visualization standpoint, is take cluster and drop this here. And we can see here that we get clusters of hitters, right? So it just uses these two basic variables that we've been using for the scatter plot, which is batting average and hard hit percentage. But we get a few, 3 unique clusters here, and we can begin to try to go ahead and interpret them. So if we see what's going on the batting average and the hard hit percentage, now you might have completely different interpretations of this. That's one thing with clustering, is that it is subjective. But my interpretation, as I went through this and kind of practiced beforehand, was I look at these orange data points. We see that these are players that, you know, in the top right quadrant of the entire plot space have a pretty high hard hit percentage, have a pretty high batting average. So what I kind of consider these players as is basically all around hitters that are good at everything, right? So we have your Aaron Judges, Shohei Ohtani. I think this is Juan Soto, exactly, right? So the other two clusters are kind of a trade-off between one or the other. They're not great at both, but they tend to be better at one over the other. So our red cluster, we can see here that most of these players don't have the highest batting average. And in fact, none of them are really over 0.26, but a lot of them are hitting the ball relatively hard. Again, not generally as hard as the all-around hitters here. These are really your star players, but have a pretty high hard hit percentage, all things considered. And then your blue players here, I generally consider those to be, you know, for lack of a better term here, on base hitters. These are players that, again, not hitting the ball very hard, but getting on base relatively well. One of these points, yeah, we can see here is Jose Altuve, a guy who, again, is getting on base at a pretty high clip, but not really hitting the ball all that hard. So another thing we can do is we can add these clusters to our data set. Basically, we can create a new column that uses the clusters as a way to go ahead and use these clusters elsewhere, right? So to be able to take this and bring it somewhere else outside of just this one scatter plot. One thing I'll show you real quick though, is if you click on the down arrow on clusters here and describe clusters, you'll get some of the math behind these things, right? So you'll see in cluster 1, which again, if I drag this away, is our on base hitters, or at least that's what I call them. They have the second highest average, you know, on base percentage here, or excuse me, batting average, versus your sum of hard hit percentage is pretty low. These all around hitters have the highest both average as well as hard hitting percentage, and again, your hard hitting hitters here have, you know, a pretty decent hard hit percentage, but really not having a very high batting average. But again, one thing I can do here is go ahead and click on my clusters, drag that over, excuse me, if I go back to the data tab, if I drag that over to my categorical variables, you can see here that now I can create a new column out of this, right? What I can also do is rename my cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, because those are a little bit ambiguous. I talked about kind of my interpretation of them, but if I just, call out cluster 1, you probably have to come to the legend here to first understand what I'm talking about. So I can click on my cluster here. I can edit group. And now with these, I can go ahead and rename them. Again, I called cluster 2. We'll go ahead and rename this. We'll call it all around hitter. Cluster 3, my red data points, we'll call these power hitters. And then cluster 1 will be our on base hitters here. Right, click OK there, and now we've renamed them. And again, I can go back to my data source here, and if I look all the way to the right, now we have this new column that goes ahead and signifies what kind of hitter our given player is. Now, if I turn this around, if I don't want these labels here, let me take clusters out of the color here, kind of throw it back to the analytics, just get rid of it. But now I still have this column here that we created from those clusters, and I can drop that into color instead. Now we just have these better labels, right? So now what if we wanted to see some kind of relationship between team success and the type of hitters that they have in their lineup, right? Now, this is a very imperfect picture. We don't have that information on the teams in terms of win percentage. But if I wanted to look at, again, only being qualified hitters here, we'd like to see, a bigger part of the roster. But if I wanted to go ahead and be able to see how many of these types of hitters are on different teams in the league, I can do so really easy with a stacked bar chart. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my teams and drop that into columns on my x-axis here. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that we have some players who, were traded or were either dropped in the middle of the season and picked up by another team. Some players that played on 2 teams. So I do want to go ahead and get rid of those. So if I drop team into filters, we can see the list of all of our teams. And I can just go ahead and unclick to TMS and get rid of those players. From here, I can go ahead and drag name to rows. Now, at first, this seems a little bit weird, right? But it will show you basically each individual player and what team they played for. So Aaron Judge here over to New York Yankees. But what I do want to do is see the count of players, right? So instead of seeing, kind of this weird, Excel sheet type of visualization here that really isn't doing much for me, I can change name to measure and to count. Now we can see out of our 129 players here, minus the players that played for multiple teams, how many of those are across these different teams, right? This still isn't too informative. All it tells us is that, Milwaukee, for example, has 7 qualified hitters on their team. But now, if I go ahead and take cluster and drop that into color, we can start to see what type of teams have what type of hitters, right? So again, we'll just call it the Yankees real quick. I'm from New York. They have a couple power hitters. They have 1 on base hitter and they have 2 all around hitters, right? So those all around hitters are those really, really good players. We know that basically Aaron Judge and Juan Soto last year were able to be those type of hitters for the Yankees. We can talk about some other teams perhaps. For example, St. Louis here has 4 on base hitters. They don't really have much coming from power hitters or anything like that. Some other teams only have power hitters in terms of these type of things. And again, now you could buff this up a little bit by adding in another factor in terms of win percentage, try to go ahead and see what kind of relationships there are, what kind of players you might want to have, right? Everyone would want to go ahead and have as many all-around hitters as possible, but outside of that, if you want to build around those, what kind of players would you rather have? Would you rather have the ones that tend to get on base often, or would you rather have more power hitters that can go for home runs or bigger hits in general? Now, the last thing I do want to show you here is how we can take a couple graphs and be able to see these things all at once and create one final powerful visualization that tends to be really important once you get into the industry and the business world and how we want to go ahead and show our analyses, right? A lot of times you'll hear people working for teams talking about how coaches want, a 1 sheet of paper or something. All the analytics try to condense it into one thing, right? So this is a good example of a way that we can go ahead and be able to do that. So if I go down into the bottom left here, you'll see that normally I was clicking on basically what looks like a mini bar graph with a plus sign to create a new sheet. And now I'm going ahead and going to create what is a new dashboard. I'm going to click on new dashboard. First thing you'll notice here, again, huge white space for the most part. This is going to be our, our dashboard plot space for this example. We can see on the left-hand side, we have our sheets available to us. And now, excuse me, in the bottom left, we have a bunch of objects we can work with as well, right? So we're going to use the text box here today, but we can also go ahead and bring images in and do other stuff like that. The most important thing when we go ahead and be able to work with dashboards is we want to change from tiled to floating. So tiled basically means that all of the plots that you bring in will be stuck into very specific spots, not really easy to go ahead and move around. Floating will give you a lot more creativity, allow you to move things around, structure things, and shape things however way you want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on floating first. Now I'm going to go and bring in my sheet 1. So this brings ahead the graph, and it brings ahead the legend as well. This is going to be my main plot, right? It's going to take up the most amount of space. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this and drop it in the bottom right corner. The nice thing about the legend is that it moves around any way you want it. So I can just drop it on top of the plot space. We see here that basically it's transparent in the background, so it can drop into the white space of the graph really nice here. One thing I will do before I move on to bringing in sheet 2 is that you can see here that we're a little bit limited, in terms of the room that we have. So generally we would want things like our title to kind of be towards the top of the page. And with a, bar chart like this, horizontally for the most part with, 30 teams, we kind of are limited in terms of where we can put things. One thing I can do though with my bar chart is I can rotate it. I'll have to move this real quick. I can rotate it 90 degrees. So now that we have something more that we can go ahead and work with. So now when I bring in sheet 2, I can tuck it into the left-hand side over here. And if I bring it a little bit higher, we should be able to go ahead and see all 30 of our teams. Now, again, I might want to go ahead and bring, my legend somewhere else. Doesn't really matter where we put it. The nice thing, again, is that it correlates all the colors between, the two graphs here. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring a title and also bring another text box in to add some additional details. So let me bring this text in. And this will be our title. So I'll say, let's see what I want to name this. So a cluster analysis of qualified hitters in the MLB. And now, kind of just like you're in Word, you can go ahead and change the size of things. So let's go ahead and make this 18 font. I can bold it, and let's make it the color blue, for example. And click OK. And let's just go back and edit this, and let's make this 18. There we go. And now we have a good working title. And now what if I also want to have some information in terms of the clusters? What are these hitters? What are they actually separated on, right? So this is something I took a screenshot of earlier, so I had the information. But of course, when we were back in sheet 1, I showed you how you can see the description of the clusters, basically what those averages were across the different clusters. So I'll first talk about my all-around hitters. And we will have, let's see, a 0.283 batting average and a 48.6% hard hit percentage. We also have our power hitters. These are ones with pretty low batting average again, 0.239 and 41% hard hit. And then lastly, our on-base hitters. And what we have for them is a 267 batting average. And let me add that in up here as well. And just a 32.7% hard hit. Right, I'd like to color these as well, right, to make things line up. So all around, we'll make that blue as well. We'll make our power hitters, we'll make that red. I guess what I'll also do Let's put these in the order of the legend. And our on base hitters will make orange. Now, I'll just let these go for now and see, basically, I'll edit this again, see how big we can get these without it taking up too much space. Let's try 14. And I can drag this out a little bit. And that seems to be something that works pretty well for us. Right, so pretty quick introduction here in terms of how to use Tableau, how to use basically the very easy parts of this to go ahead and create some basic visualizations in terms of scatter plots and bar charts and stuff, but also how we can bring in these analytics, right? So another thing I could do if I wanted to is bring in a trend line. These things tend to be relatively linear, but we can see that also when you have groups in terms of the color, it will make trend lines based on each of those groups, right? So that's another thing we can do. Obviously, we showed the cluster. And as well, kind of getting into a more formal presentation or something that combines these things together, we can work with our dashboard, right? So very easy thing to do. This took a whole 20 minutes, and I'm talking during the entire thing. So if it's something where you're trying to get into analytics, but you don't necessarily have all the technical skills, this can be a really powerful tool for you to go ahead and be able to do these type of things. Obviously, as you build your skills, things like R and Python, you can probably do some more powerful visualizations, more complex analysis. But to this day, as someone who's been working for R and Python for many years now, I still come back to Tableau sometime if I just have a specific type of graph I have in my mind, and maybe I don't know how to do it immediately in R or another programming language. I know I can do it pretty easily and quickly in Tableau. So a lot of times I go ahead and just do that for the simplicity of it all. But yeah, that's what I have for you today, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you guys might be able to have. So Mark asked, would the orange cluster be home run producer? So our oranges are, that might have been an earlier question, right? In terms of when the clusters were a different color. So let me go ahead and actually share again, and hopefully I can see the chat at the same time. But let me share real quick. So if we have those orange clusters as before, I believe those were the power hitters, right? As I kind of named them, and I can take my trend line out real quick. But so one thing we might want to do, right, is see, are these players that, again, aren't getting on base all that often, or, don't have a super high batting average, but are they going ahead and, having, a good home run season, right? So I don't know if I don't have the variable in here, but you can always do something like take something and add it to size. So if I had home runs in here, I could throw that into size and see basically what happens there, right? We don't have too big of a difference in terms of slugging percentage, unfortunately. But that's another way that you could add an element there that can help you, again, go ahead and be able to describe your clusters. How did I move the column again? Well, I'm not exactly sure what the specific question is here, but anytime you click and drag these, you can kind of call them pills. You can click and drag them really anywhere, right? So if I wanted to take barrel percentage, for example, I could drop that into label and be able to see. Now with something like label in the scatter plot, Tableau will go ahead and fit as many of the labels as it possibly can. And it basically optimizes the number of labels that they can provide, but it only can do, so much here. Yeah, Brandon, Power BI is another really similar program that will go ahead and be able to do things like dashboards as well. Great job answering Jacob's question there. So yeah, Power BI, if that's something that's available to you, it really depends. Tableau, I think you can go ahead and generally get student licenses for this to be able to use it and download it on your own computer, which is really nice, but I'm not sure if that has to go ahead and has to be for university students only, or if high school students can do that again. But there are free trials as well, right, where you can get, I think, up to 2 weeks of access to this, as long as you have some data that you can go ahead and bring in. See some other questions. Tim, right at the beginning, right, saw my LeBron file there. Obviously basketball there, and that's just if you ever wanted to look up Kirk Goldsberry's video you made of different visualizations when LeBron scored or broke the record for most points. It's just doing my best to recreate those visualizations for a different lecture there. So that's really all that LeBron file was going ahead and trying to do. Tyler asked, do you think the best way to get better with Tableau to explore and play around with it? Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times I don't even know the type of graph that I'm trying to make or what's possible, but I'll just kind of drag things around and see what's possible there. Now, you want to have some caution when it comes to the marks box and stuff and not add too many things in where there's just a million things going on in the graph and it's a bit distracting, but I think playing around with things and just trying stuff out again, in terms of playing around, it's a lot easier to do something where you're dragging and dropping things, or just, quickly making a change here and there and then trying to write code, right? Because playing around with code, if you don't know how to write code, you're probably not going to go ahead and be able to get too far. You can also definitely look up YouTube or just go to Google and ask how to do different things in Tableau. And there's, I'm sure, a bunch of different demonstrations and videos out there that you can go ahead and be able to watch. I know you can hover over each point to see the player, but is there a way you can make it a label for each point? Technically, yes. You can force basically points to go ahead and have an annotate and everything like that. However, again, when you have a lot of overlapping data points, it goes ahead and gets to be super, super noisy and not very visual here. So you really have to play around and make sure that you want to have the labels that you're trying to put on there. But something like a bar chart, right? So this is a lot better. This is a lot cleaner. Everything has its own space. It's fixed space here. So I don't think I really have much in terms of going on. But if we wanted to look at, for example, WOBA, I can throw that to label. I can change that to like, average, for example, and see what kind of that looks like across different player types. That's one way that, the annotation and the labeling here is a little bit easier to work with. Jacob, awesome. So you're any insight for prospective fall college students? So you're coming in as the for the master's program. So one thing I am teaching one of the master's courses right now, and if you're coming in the fall, I will have you in class in the fall for one of the intro classes. And of course, you can go ahead and start to play with things and play around with Tableau, maybe play around with R and Python and stuff. But of course, with our program, we're going to go ahead and try to teach you guys as much as possible there. So, not really any strong need to go ahead and get into things early on, but there's a lot of easy to interpret and good resources out there. I know the last presentation was talking about baseball with R. That's a really good one. If that's a book you wanted to get into, if you wanted to kind of really slowly go through the process and learn how to use R. But again, the whole structure of the master's program is supposed to go ahead and teach you all these things in an online and easily digestible format. But again, Jacob, that's awesome. And I'll have you as one of my students, pretty soon here. Yeah, Brandon, Kirk is one of my favorite people. I think one thing too for people who are trying to go ahead and get into analytics and just learn things is to go to social media and find people who post their analyses or visualizations on there often, right? So Kirk has written a few books. He has a poster that looks at, his version of topology of the NBA court, right? So seeing basically frequency of shot attempts and stuff like that. And he has all these little Easter eggs in there in terms of, references to players and moments throughout, college and NBA history and stuff like that. So people like that, I think, are a really good way to get people excited and into analytics if they haven't been before, without being, too nervous about, all the hard math and coding and everything like that. So I think, again, social media, blogging sites in terms of these type of things are really good to give people an easy to digest way of being able to read and get into analytics, because again, a lot of the math machine learning, AI stuff behind all this stuff can be pretty difficult to understand, but obviously what goes on, here and what, some of the simpler analytics or anything like that can be really fun to go ahead and use. And again, there's a lot of people who are doing a lot of those really, extremely hard things to understand, but will be able to give it to you in a very digestible format. But awesome. Looks like we're pretty close to the end of my time. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions or if I missed anyone. But yeah, again, I really appreciate everyone's time. If anyone wants to, reach out to me in the future or anything like that for more questions, I will type my email into the chat now, and I'd be more than happy to be able to, connect or talk with any of you in the future.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you so much. Wonderful job as
Thank you.
always. And once again, thanks to Syracuse University Falk College of Sport and Human Dynamics for presenting today's student session.